Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to finish Caesar in Gaul from Kings and Generals. So last time Caesar invaded Britain he invaded Britain twice during that last part. And now I think there's going to be a lot of revolts in Gaul. Probably because Caesar hasn't been in Gaul for that long. Right? Alright, original videos down below. Let's go.
In 54 BC, a Gallic tribe, the Eburones, under their leader Ambiorix, successfully revolted in Belgica, ambushing and destroying the 7,000 to 9,000 strong Roman detachment that had been sent to winter in their territory at Attuatica.
I mean, it always looks like it's the border tribe, sort of, right? The territory near the Rhine River, right? It looks like it's always them, probably because they get support from the German tribes, perhaps, right? And the German tribe says, yeah, attack the Romans, we're going to help you or something, supply you or whatever, right? Alright.
Following this success, Ambiorix began to besiege the Roman garrison in the Nervii territory, and a general revolt in the area broke out, the Indutio Maris and the Treveri also rising in rebellion and being supported by the Germanic tribes across the Rhine. This was a dangerous position. Caesar had spread his legions across Gaul in order to not put too much strain on the resources of one area, and thus divided, they were vulnerable targets.
I mean, that is a smart strategy on Caesar's part, right? Not putting so much strain, because he's probably living off the land. I mean, he has to live off the land. But he makes a good decision, I think. Spreading out his army so they're not straining the population so they don't revolt. But if they revolt when you are separated, like they did now, then you're in a precarious situation, right? I mean, this is how you can lose a legion or two or three or almost everybody except for under Caesar.
However, he reacted quickly, marching directly to the besieged legion in Nervii territory, while Labienus
like he usually does.
The Indutio Maris. Upon seeing Caesar approaching, Ambiorix gave up the siege to face this new threat and was quickly defeated, while almost simultaneously, Labienus was able to successfully repel his opponents.
Okay.
Roman retribution for this revolt was swift and devastating.
Right. I mean, sadly you have to do that, right? They revolted and you have to destroy them almost, right? But this sets a precedent in Gaul. Probably other Gallic, leaders in other parts of Gaul sees that, oh, they revolted. So they're probably going to create a council maybe or something together. And together they're stronger against the Romans and maybe they can defeat Caesar.
The Eburones were effectively wiped out, while Ambiorix, according to some sources, left Gaul for Germania. To help stabilize the situation, Pompey mobilized 2 more legions, and Caesar himself raised another. He now had almost 50,000 men in Gaul under his command. However, this was only the prelude to something much bigger. In 52 BC, Caesar returned to Italy in order to defuse another political problem, and in the same year, another large-scale revolt started. An Arverni leader, Vercingetorix, who probably knew about the political problems in Rome, had organized an alliance of powerful Gallic tribes that, inspired by Ambiorix, were now seeking independence, and had...
Like I said, that's the only... Either doing that, gathering to get together and fighting together against the Romans, or maybe do a diplomatic mission and you probably get a sovereign city or something from the Romans. Perhaps that's how you do it. But right, they saw the revolt and they said, oh yeah, we can also do that, right? And also Caesar isn't there. And Vercingetorix I don't know about all accounts, but by some accounts, he knew about how Rome sort of was. Sort of like Hannibal. Right? I don't know if we know exactly how he knew that. Maybe spies, maybe merchants, I don't know.
Had begun attacking Roman outposts and Roman allies in Gaul. Upon hearing this, Caesar quickly returned to Gaul to handle the situation. Going on one of his famous forced marches, he swiftly quelled the Senones and Carnutes by taking their capitals. His next target was one of the largest towns of the Bituriges, Novia Dunum. Vercingetorix attempted to stop Caesar's advance near the city, but the Roman heavy infantry was too much for the Gauls and they were forced to retreat, losing men.
Right. Because they're probably lightly armed or armored, the Gauls, fighting against Roman heavy infantry. They probably have cavalry, which is a threat to Caesar if they surprise him and ambush him and are quick, right? But not here.
Which allowed Caesar to take the city. To finish off the Bituriges, he needed to take their capital, Avaricum. At this point, Vercingetorix started employing scorched earth tactics, and the Bituriges joined him by burning down 20 of their towns, every one.
Whoa, what? But that makes sense, right? The Bituriges, if they're not on Vercingetorix's side, they have to weigh the options. Vercingetorix says, oh, okay, like Hannibal, burned cities, and they said, okay, we'll join you against Caesar. Caesar probably is going to do the same thing, but Vercingetorix did it first, so he gets the Bituriges.
But Avaricum. The Romans moved against this settlement and besieged it, and although Avaricum was very defensible and Vercingetorix attempted to help its defenders, it fell in less than a month. Caesar slaughtered 40,000 locals and replenished his supplies. It was clear for Vercingetorix that he couldn't beat the Romans in the field. Meanwhile, Caesar was eager to end the rebellion before it could spread to other Gallic tribes, so he...
Which, that could be a mistake on Caesar's part, because he's trying to get ahead of something that has started to roll. And you look here, he has split his army, and Vercingetorix has learned that he can't defeat Caesar in open battle, so he has to surprise him, probably do raids, because raids are pretty good, like we saw in Britain in the last part. I'll leave a link down below for it. Raids are pretty good tactics against the Romans, especially when you surprise them as well.
He decided to strike the decisive blow by taking the capital of the Arverni, Gergovia. Leaving some troops in the area, Caesar marched with 25,000 towards this settlement, while Vercingetorix shadowed him. Gergovia was in a very solid defensive position, located on top of a high plateau, and Vercingetorix managed to overtake Caesar and positioned his army on the hills in front of the city.
I mean, this looks like a very good defensive position and a pretty bad position to assault on, right? Hills almost everywhere, rough, uneven terrain, which is bad for the formation. Looks like the grain supply Vercingetorix has taken away, probably from the Romans, or that's for the Gergovians. Okay.
As he had done in previous battles, Caesar hoped to cut his enemies' supply lines in order to force them out of their defensive position, whilst he would be receiving supplies from the Aedui, his Gallic allies. However, the Gauls had occupied a hill overlooking the supply line, from where they could ensure water and grain could be transported into the city. Taking it would therefore be crucial to Caesar's plan.
But it looks like Vercingetorix's army is bigger. Maybe it's not, I don't know. But it looks like he has more cavalry though, which could be bad. Because if he sends out his troops, if Caesar splits his troops to go and get the grain supply to disrupt that, he has split his army, and then if Vercingetorix attacks, that would be very difficult.
In a quick night attack, he was able to dislodge the Gallic garrison there and station 2 legions on the hill, linking this position with the main Roman camp by a trench. So far, all was going according to plan. Caesar's allies would supply him from the rear, and Vercingetorix would now be forced to either sacrifice his defensive position in order to re-establish his supply line, or be starved out.
I mean, that is classic Caesar move, classic good leader in military, right? You decide what ground you want to fight on, which this one, I don't know if he decided that, but he decides the terms on which the battle is fought, right? He is giving the ball to Vercingetorix now. Caesar has, right? Vercingetorix has to either attack Caesar on the hill, like he said, take the grain supply, or attack Caesar just his whole army and then defeat the other one in detail. Which Caesar is probably ready for that. Or he has to go into the siege or something like that, right? He gives him options, but the options aren't pretty good for Vercingetorix, but let's see what happens.
However, Vercingetorix had his own plans. He bribed the Aedui, who then also joined the revolt, attacking the Roman supplies and threatening to cut off Caesar and surround him.
This is what I mean by Caesar is trying to get ahead of the revolt. So he's stuck now in a siege/battle, and he has split his force as well. And now another tribe is revolting, so he's basically cut off, right?
Once again, Vercingetorix seems to have studied Rome's tactics deeply, as this strategy was one of Caesar's own favorite strategies.
Right.
Caesar was forced to leave 2 legions to guard the Roman position at Gergovia, and took the other 4 to deal with the Aedui, quickly subduing them and forcing them to send 10,000 cavalry back to the siege with him.
That's smart because, I mean, he probably thinks that Vercingetorix is going to attack his smaller force, or his 2 legions, and he brings cavalry, right? That's pretty smart. And Caesar goes for the most important thing first. Vercingetorix isn't the most important thing, it's the Aedui, right? Decisive.
This revolt had Caesar worried that he might face even more revolts, and could soon be encircled by the rebels. He needed to extract his legions from Gergovia and consolidate his troops.
Yep.
However, the situation at the city was not looking good.
Look at that.
The 2 legions left to guard the Roman camp had been hard-pressed the entire time Caesar had been gone. Furthermore,
but they're standing still.
Vercingetorix had divided his forces, leaving half to defend and fortify the main Gallic camp in front of the city, and half, led by himself, to fortify positions on the surrounding hills on the Gallic right flank. With a 6-foot wall now in front of the main Gallic camp, and the Gallic fortifications on the hills, Vercingetorix had removed any opportunity for Caesar to encircle him and the city.
Which he probably wanted with the cavalry, right? But look at that. Vercingetorix also engineer, right? Like Caesar. Caesar probably would have also built a wall like he did a trench here, right? So it's not just Vercingetorix isn't a barbarian, swings a sword or axe or whatever and screams, right? He's much more intelligent, right? Most of them are as well.
Seeing the Gallic forces divided, Caesar saw an opportunity to attack their main camp in order to deal a heavy enough blow to allow his army to retreat unmolested. He sent a diversionary force of 1 legion and some cavalry to the surrounding hills, making a huge amount of noise in order to distract the force commanded by Vercingetorix.
I mean, that's one of the most common strategies that a small army does when attacking or trying to look like you're attacking. Screaming. If it's a little bit darker, you probably have a lot of torches and screaming and shouting. If it's at night and you're trying to retreat, you have a small band of army having a lot of campfires and a lot of torches walking back and forward. And that looks like the army is still there.
Then he quickly and quietly moved his remaining legions up to the Gallic camp, leaving a few cohorts in the smaller camp on the occupied hill, while the Aedui cavalry were sent to flank around the Gallic left by another route.
Okay.
The Romans quickly
clambered
over the wall and fell upon the Gallic camp. The Romans initially had significant success, pushing the Gauls right up to the walls of the city, but Caesar ordered a withdrawal before the rest of the Gallic force under Vercingetorix could reinforce them. However,
I mean, that's smart, but also, I mean, that looks like Caesar isn't falling into the sunken cost fallacy, right? Which, oh, I've lost so much and I have to push on. But also, he might need to push on so he defeats the army, because now he half defeated the army, it looks like, right?
However, only one legion, the 10th, heard this order and retreated,
the
others continuing to press on and assaulting the city itself. Some Romans managed to climb on top of the city walls, but were quickly cut down and thrown back off.
Yeah.
Missiles from the city walls fell into the Roman ranks as they fought around the base of the walls.
I mean, think of this. How do you hear a command? Obviously, they had horns or whistles, or I don't know what. I think it was whistles they had, maybe. But it doesn't matter. Still, you can say when you're in the zone, because you're going there with a sword or spear or whatever, you hear a whistle, you think, oh, it's just a bird or something, right? And you just charge because you're in a frenzy almost. You have cohesion, but you're still in that mode of in battle, right? So it makes sense.
Vercingetorix, realizing what was happening from his position on the surrounding hills,
cavalry
sent the rest of his force, headed by his cavalry, to reinforce the camp. The Roman position was now truly desperate. The initial Gallic force and the city walls were in front of them. There was no way of cutting a way out by pushing forward, and with Vercingetorix crashing into their flank, the legionaries were under serious pressure and were almost surrounded.
Caesar has to attack, or the other cavalry has to come, right?
The officers did their best to maintain Roman discipline and form a defensive formation. According to Caesar himself, 46 centurions died in this struggle, roughly a quarter of all the centurions present, and so maintaining any solid formation was almost impossible.
Difficult.
The Aedui finally appeared on a hill to the Roman right flank.
There you go.
But the Romans, unable to tell if they were allied or not, broke completely, thinking that they were about to be fully surrounded.
Saw that, right? They could have just annihilated Vercingetorix. Big cavalry force coming in the rear or on the left flank of infantry. Wow.
Caesar was able to use the 10th Legion and the cohorts that had been stationed in the small camp to cover the retreat, and prevented the Gauls from chasing them down, avoiding the total destruction of his army, and withdrew from the field.
Which again, that was the whole point of the attack, to attack so you can then retreat, right? But they attacked and then they didn't hear that they had to retreat, only one cohort or something retreated. And then they still advanced and got almost annihilated. And then Caesar attacked and they retreated.
In his commentaries, Caesar says that only 700 men were lost in this battle, but this is likely vastly underplaying the situation.
Double?
Caesar being forced to assemble a rear guard
10
and
times?
retreating shows how disastrous the battle was, and it is likely that the Romans lost thousands, modern estimates suggesting as many as 6,000.
Wow.
While Caesar was fighting a losing battle against Vercingetorix at Gergovia, his best legate, Titus Labienus, was sent to deal with rebellions in northern Gaul. Local Gauls, emboldened by Vercingetorix and led by Camulogenus, were consolidating around modern Paris, which was...
I mean, yeah, it's getting worse and worse. You see more green there, right? It's getting worse and worse. And especially when Caesar is defeated or had a major loss of men in a battle, right?
Called Lutetia at that time, and was the capital of the Parisii. Labienus had left a legion near Agedincum in order to have a supply line to Caesar, and marched with 4 more legions towards Lutetia. His troops took Metlosidum along the way, but their attempts to cross the river Seine were blocked by Camulogenus. Labienus was forced to retreat back to Metlosidum.
I mean, yeah, how do you cross that? It's a river. It's pretty wide. How do you cross a river like that pretty quickly with a massive army? Caesar did it. He has massive engineering feats that he always does. I don't know if Labienus has that.
Him, his scouts had found another crossing near Metlosidum. He crossed there and moved against the Gauls. However, Camulogenus used Vercingetorix's scorched earth tactic, burning Lutetia and retreating to the swamps beyond. At the same time, Labienus learned about Caesar's defeat.
I mean, one thing though, they say that Caesar went in and like millions, 2 or 1 million people died in this war, right? And that's considered war crimes and all that, right? Which it probably is. But the other side that Caesar was fighting did the same thing. They burned their own town, burned the crops, slaughtered civilians. So, you know, you can call him a maniac here, but the other side did the same thing. So, you know,
at Gergovia,
just saying.
Which provoked a big Gallic tribe called Bellovaci, led by Corius, to rebel. So he knew that he had to retreat beyond the Seine and unite with his legion in Agedincum.
Smart.
Labienus' decision to divide his forces into 3 provoked Camulogenus into attacking him to the south of Lutetia without waiting for the Bellovaci, and in the ensuing battle, the Romans used the fact that their divided forces were closer to each other. Each group supported the other, and the legions managed to defeat the Gauls with ease.
There you go.
Camulogenus was killed in the process, which slowed down the consolidation of the anti-Roman rebellion in northern Gaul.
Right. I mean, that's Roman tactics for you. That's pretty good.
Caesar and Labienus both retreated towards Agedincum, where they united their forces. Meanwhile, more and more Gauls were joining the rebellion, and after the rest of the Aedui joined it, even the Roman province of Narbonensis was attacked by them. Caesar and his 10 legions moved through the Sequani and Lingonese territory to the east, in order to gain a line of retreat to the Roman province of Gallia Transalpina. At the same time, Caesar's envoys secured a group of Germanic mercenaries who joined the Roman cavalry.
There you go.
Vercingetorix and his 80,000 tried to attack Caesar when the latter was trying to cross the Vingaiani River, but the Romans were able to stop the attack with ease. It is not clear why, but this minor defeat either disheartened Vercingetorix or showed him that he couldn't win against the Romans in an open battle. So he probably tried to recreate the factors that led to the victory at Gergovia when he retreated to the Mandubii capital of Alesia. Caesar followed him to the settlement. Alesia was a well-defended city on a hill, and Vercingetorix sent messages to his nearby allies to come to his aid.
I mean, yeah, look at that. It's almost rivers all around it, right? That's a pretty good defensive position. And there's 4 mountains around it. Wow.
Vercingetorix was in a strong position. He outnumbered Caesar, commanding a force of up to 80,000 men, and was surrounded by allies who would be able to quickly send men to reinforce him. From his position, it should be a simple rerun of Gergovia. He would wait on the high ground for his allies to arrive so they could either disrupt the Roman supply lines or attack them in the rear. Caesar had learnt his lesson though. Despite his smaller numbers, he immediately began the work of fully surrounding and besieging Alesia, something which Vercingetorix had been able to prevent him doing at Gergovia.
This is the famous battle, right? I'm not gonna spoil it, but this is pretty famous. And again, Caesar with his engineering, walls, ditches, trenches, everything.
The Romans began constructing a 16-kilometer wall, fully encircling the entire city, complete with palisades, trenches, and towers, hoping to cut off any escape.
Right, and supplies probably.
Vercingetorix sent his cavalry out to try and disrupt these works, but the legions were able to form a defensive line to hold them, while the German auxiliaries flanked around the side. The Germans proved to be vital to the Roman cause, and their superior horsemanship forced the Gallic cavalry to retreat back into the city, killing many as they were funneled into the narrow gates. Realizing that he would soon be completely surrounded, Vercingetorix decided to send out what was left of his cavalry at night to sneak past the Roman line and head to the nearby tribes to request reinforcements as soon as possible.
Yeah, he needs that.
Upon completing the first wall, Caesar learned from some Gallic deserters that these messengers had been sent, and so constructed a second wall.
There you go.
Almost 21 kilometers long, and
look at that, double walls. He didn't only need a wall and ditches and trenches to protect himself and contain the siege, or Vercingetorix at least. He also did it to protect himself from other tribes from attacking him. Engineering feat in war.
2 trenches and a moat facing outwards to protect against any Gallic reinforcements, creating a donut-like structure with Alesia in the center.
Look at that.
He next sent out huge foraging parties to collect enough food to sustain his troops for the next 30 days. In doing
right, because basically Caesar is also in a siege, sort of, if an enemy force is coming from the outside and attacking, right?
This, Caesar had effectively robbed Vercingetorix of his advantages. With the Romans thus defended and supplied, it was the Gauls who now faced a well-dug-in enemy, and it was now Vercingetorix whose time was running out.
I mean, just look at
that. With an army of 80,000 men inside the city, plus the civilian population and no way of resupplying, it was only a matter of time before he was starved out.
I mean, yeah. He's basically going to starve out if he doesn't attack or outside forces attack and he attacks at the same time and gets away, right? This is like Napoleon's siege of Mantua, right? But they didn't have an outer wall, right? I mean, it's just a siege, but
this was Caesar's
they're not
magnum
sieging.
Opus. Faced with a desperate situation,
civilians
made the difficult decision to expel anyone who wasn't going to be fighting. The old, the sick, women and children. He had hoped that Caesar would allow these people through the Roman defenses and to safety. But
one thing though, there is a good series, I don't know where it is, on HBO or something, I don't know. That's called Rome. And I think there's 2 seasons. Or is it 1? No, I think there's 2 seasons. And in the first season you see Caesar in Gaul and you see this battle. And you see them, I think Vercingetorix, or you see the civilians pleading with Caesar or Roman men, Roman soldiers, to let them pass. Okay.
Caesar was not in a merciful mood.
Right.
He refused to let them pass, and the civilians were left between the walls of Alesia and the Romans, imploring both sides for food and water, neither side relenting.
I mean, this is a perfect example or representation of civilians caught up in war. The people who revolted wasn't probably these civilians, right? It was probably leaders and then probably some soldiers and maybe some civilians, right? But most civilians here, at least, are always in between 2 opposing armies, forces, whatever. And they are probably not on either side, right?
Over the next few days, many died of starvation and thirst. the space between the armies becoming full of the dying and dead.
Wow.
The Gallic allies finally arrived to try and relieve the siege, under the command of Vercingetorix's cousin, Vercassivelanus. It is hard to say precisely how many there were. Caesar claims that the number was as high as 250,000, with modern estimates suggesting somewhere between 70 and 100,000.
I mean, still, that is a lot. And remember, Vercingetorix's force is bigger than Caesar's. Almost the same as his cousin here by modern estimates. So in total, 160,000, let's say 150,000. I don't know how much Caesar had. 60? 50,000? He has good defenses, but still.
Whatever the true number was, all agree that the Romans were now significantly outnumbered,
at
least 2 to 1.
Yep, in a bad position as well.
On the first day of their arrival, they quickly filled in the first Roman trench and sent across a combined force of light infantry and cavalry to probe the defences, whilst the rest of the army set up camp. Caesar countered by sending out his own.
But I also think the reason why he has the forward trench here is so he slows the enemy exactly like he's doing here, right? They have to go in the trench and then out of the trench to probe or maybe charge and attack. But that gives the Romans time to get ready and attack or defend.
Germanic cavalry, and a fierce skirmish ensued. From their elevated position inside the city, the besieged Gauls saw that their allies had arrived and simultaneously began massing for a sally against the inner fortifications. However, the Germans once again proved their skill, outmaneuvering and flanking their Gallic counterparts, forcing them back across the trench and into the Gallic camp.
Look at that.
Seeing his allies defeated, Vercingetorix decided to bide his time and held off his attack.
Right, it's German horses or cavalry,
Reinforcements spent the next day constructing siege ladders, and then at midnight launched another attack. Taking the Romans by surprise, they found some initial success. But Mark Antony, in his first battle, was commanding this section of the wall and proved himself to be a composed and skillful lieutenant, pulling...
This is pretty cool though. Same as my series where I reacted to Napoleon in Italy. You see all the guys who are going to be future marshals or great commanders in the Napoleonic Wars. Here you see the same thing. Mark Antony, he's going to be very important later on. Right? That's pretty cool.
Troops from other sections of the walls to reinforce his position. Again, Vercingetorix began to sally out to try and help his allies, but was delayed by having to fill the Roman trench.
Exactly.
By the time he had crossed it, Antony had successfully fought off the assault, and Vercingetorix again withdrew into the city.
That's the reason you have the trenches,
Following
right?
these two failed assaults, Vercassivelanus conducted more thorough reconnaissance of the Roman position, and discovered that a steep hill overlooked the Roman wall in the northern section. Hoping to use this high ground to his advantage, the next day the Gauls used their overwhelming numbers to attack the entire length of the outside wall, but concentrated a larger force under Vercassivelanus on this portion.
I mean, that's smart. You have the numbers. Concentrate your forces is good, but also stretching you out, but concentrating in some parts and then attacking. But also Roman discipline, like we saw in the previous battle with the Labienus had, when they were split up in 3, they still communicated with each other and had discipline there. So this is Roman tactics.
At the same time, Vercingetorix again sallied out, this time attacking the length of the interior Roman fortifications, hitting wherever looked weakest. This was the toughest the fighting had been so far. Caesar, as he had done at the Battle of Sabis, dashed from cohort to cohort, urging his men on, leading reserve cohorts personally to points where the defences looked like they were faltering. Vercassivelanus began making headway, piling earthworks up against the walls in order to mount them, and using hooks and siege engines to tear down the Roman defences. Caesar
that's
committed
smart.
every man he had left of his reserves, pulling every man who could be spared and sending them into the action.
And Caesar is outnumbered, so that could be pretty bad for him, although he has the Germanic cavalry, right? That's probably going to turn the tide.
It was a desperate battle for the Romans. Between the two walls there would be no escape, and if the line faltered, the entire army would surely be wiped out.
Yep.
The Roman line was holding the Gallic army, but it seemed like it wouldn't last for long. But then, Caesar appeared at the top of the hill.
Look at that.
Leading the Germanic auxiliaries, he crashed into the rear of the Gallic reinforcements. Surrounded now on all sides, the Gauls who had pushed through the breach were decimated, and the tide of battle changed. Seeing their largest contingent broken, the morale of the rest of the Gallic reinforcements shattered, and they quickly fled.
I mean, that makes sense. Although they had advantage, if they kept pushing, they probably would have broken a lot of Roman lines and probably would have made Caesar go into Alesia himself or something. But also, if they didn't break the Roman line, Caesar can just come with his cavalry and destroy all of them in detail.
With this threat thus neutralized, the Romans turned to deal with Vercingetorix, who was attacking the interior wall, and they were able to force him back into the city. With the city still besieged and his reinforcements spent, Vercingetorix surrendered.
Wow.
It is unknown how many Romans died, but the casualties must have been fairly significant given the intensity of the fighting, particularly at the point where the fortifications had been breached.
I mean, everybody fought. That just that alone raises the amount of casualties you're going to have. And casualties could be dead, missing, wounded, fleeing, whatever. Right?
The Gallic relief force suffered heavy casualties.
Yeah.
The entirety of the besieged army in Alesia was either killed or enslaved, and both Vercassivellaunus and Vercingetorix were taken alive.
Yep, very famous. Look at that painting.
Although most of the rebel leaders were either dead or captured, the resistance against Rome was far from over, as the Bituriges, Carnutes, Bellovaci, Atrebates, Anticavi, and others were still in open rebellion. In January of 51 BC, Caesar moved against the Bituriges. This winter campaign surprised the Bituriges, who were probably unprepared for it, and soon they sued for peace, which
again they would have done better if they all banded together, right? And had a sort of meeting and council to decide what they were going to do. Because now they're going to just get destroyed in detail and not being... They're surprised that Caesar is attacking, right?
Caesar to return to his winter quarters. However, soon the Bituriges were attacked by the Carnutes for yielding to the Romans.
See?
Once again, Caesar marched swiftly and took his enemies by surprise, forcing the Carnutes to submit. The Romans...
Right. He probably used the Bituriges as a bait for him to attack there so he can attack their capital. Wow.
Made new winter quarters at Cenabum and stayed there until the spring.
That's playing chess, not checkers. Caesar's playing chess there, right? That was a bold move as well, because that could have changed the Bituriges and others around him, and Caesar could have been surrounded again.
Leaving 6 legions in the area, Caesar took 4 and moved against the Bellovaci of Corius and the Atrebates of Commius. This campaign proved difficult, as both tribes abandoned their lands and fought a guerrilla war against the Romans. Fortunately for the legions, Corius was killed in one of the ambushes, which proved to be the final straw for the Bellovaci. They were convinced to seek peace, while Commius retreated to the east to continue his resistance.
Makes sense. Go to the German border or the Rhine.
The Anticavi attacked Liminum and were defeated by Caesar's lieutenants.
I mean, you see, they're all spread out and they're defeated in detail. That's what you have to do with a rebel force, but what the rebel force has to do either is band together and have a council, or fight guerrilla war.
The remainder of the Gallic forces in the area attempted to defend at Uxellodunum, but were defeated by Caesar soon after. The last engagement of the war saw Commius defeated in the north, and the rebellion was over.
There you go.
Gaul was pacified, and Caesar won over the remaining Gallic leaders with gifts and the promise of lower tribute.
Okay.
He knew that the battle for Rome was about to start.
The
civil war that would end the centuries-long republic was just around the corner.
Alright, that was an amazing series. Right? I mean, very in-depth. It's nice to see animated. Obviously, I think it's from a game. The animation that they're using, I think. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!